Then out spoke brave Horatius, the captain of the gate. To every man upon this earth death cometh soon or late, and how can men die better than facing fearful odds for the ashes of his fathers and the temples of his gods? Hello, my wonderful viewers, and welcome to another episode of Betty Adams Overanalyzes. Today we're going to be taking the fully spoilery look at Kaiju number 8, chapter 119, and no one does a connective tissue chapter better than Matsumoto. There will be spoilers in this, so if you don't want any spoilers, you can go check out the links below the video to get yourself a copy of my book, Hidden Fires, the latest entry in the Dying Embers universe, dragons, aliens, and things that go boom in the night. Horatius at the Gate is one of the most famous poems in the English language. What does it have to do with this chapter of this Japanese comic book series? Everything. You see, comedy, humor, jokes work because there's a kernel of truth in the joke, but you're looking at it from a different perspective. Things resonate with people because there is an element of truth in them, truth that they can see, truth that they have experienced. And the poem, Horatius at the Gate, tells of those brave people, those men in history who has stepped forward to do something that is not in of itself inherently glamorous. They're not going to face down the big bad in a climactic battle. They're just stepping up to basically throw their bodies in as a stopgap so that someone else can do something better. And these heroes, these brave men who fling themselves into these situations, show up again and again and again in stories because it resonates so deeply with humans. Now, what is this chapter? What is chapter 119 of Kaiju number 8? It's what I like to call a connective tissue chapter. For the past few chapters, we have been deep in Kafka's psyche, learning about a history that happened 400 years ago, learning about soldiers that died dozens of generations before the current storyline starts, and it's taken our eyes away from the focus of what's going on in the battle around Kafka's unconscious form. So this necessitates at least a full chapter of pulling back, looking around, realizing where everybody is. We gotta know that Mina is sitting there by Kafka trying to communicate with him, that Vice Captain Hoshina and Captain Narumi have been battling the big bad with everything they've got. We need to know what Screamy Science Guy is doing as they're monitoring the situation. So these chapters are absolutely necessary to the story. They're absolutely necessary to take the focus of us, the reader, the audience, and shift it back not only to the proper location, but to the proper resolution of the battle so that we can enjoy the next major battle. However, these chapters are often kind of irritating because nothing really happens in them. They can be slow, but again, they're absolutely necessary to the overall pace. Without them, an anime or a manga would just be a series of flashes that are not very well connected. That's why I call it a connective tissue chapter. And the mangaka has to be very clever to work something important into these connective tissue chapters. What Matsumoto has done for this one is he's reaching deep into the human psyche, and he's touched on something that truly resonates, that Horatius at the Gate story. Concept of a warrior selflessly flinging himself into a battle that he knows he can't win just to buy time for someone else. Now, why does this resonate so hard with people right now, especially coming from a manga? Well, let's just go back in time just a few years to this earthquake and tsunami that destroyed the Fukushima nuclear reactors. Now, kaiju have always been associated as a metaphor for nuclear disasters of one sort or the other. Matsumoto's kaiju tend to be more natural disasters, so it makes the connection even stronger because Fukushima was a natural disaster that was complicated by the destruction of these reactors. When it came time to go and clean up after the disaster, there was a group of volunteers, expert engineers, all retired, these all over the age of 60. These were pensioners sitting comfortably in their houses. No one would have asked them to step up and do this. But they said, this is radiation, this is a long-term issue, this is a job for the old, not for the young. And so these old men, some of them as old as their 70s or 80s, stepped up. They had the skills, they had the training, they put on the radiation shielding that they knew wasn't going to be complete. Many of them said, well, I mean, it's going to take 20 years for this cancer to manifest. I'll probably be dead by then anyway, which was good. But they said, we are going to step into the breach and do this dirty cleanup job, this job that has no glamour to it, because it is better that we face this danger than someone else. So they were going in, sacrificing their own health, their own safety, so that young people with their lives ahead of them wouldn't have to. Men stepping up to face a glamourless, thankless task so that somebody else won't have to. And let's go back a little further to something that not many people are aware of, but in the 1980s, there was this thing going on called the Cold War, and there was this massive tension between the U.S. and Russia and the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union was sending their subs to spy on the East Coast, and the U.S. sub-commanders on the East Coast had the job of scaring these other subs off, driving them off without starting a war. One thing leads to another. 1986, K-219, a Russian submarine, which was just, as I said, stacked with issues long before it left port. It was old, it was rusty, it had malfunctions, but it was declared seaworthy and sent out to go stalk the east coast of the U.S. It was met by a U.S. submarine, and they ended up playing a game of cat and mouse, which led to one of the 5 silos on K219, which held one of its 15 nuclear missiles getting damaged, which led to a cascade of effects, which led to the nuclear engine melting down. And again, you have the situation. They needed 2 men to go in there and shut it down. The chief engineer went in and he said, I need a volunteer, someone who's small, won't use up my chair so we can work as long as we can. And a Russian farm boy, who wouldn't have been old enough to drink in the U.S., went in knowing he would die to shut down that nuclear reactor, saved the crew, saved the entire eastern seaboard, probably prevented a nuclear war. This was the same year that you had the Chernobyl disaster, and after the disaster you had the Chernobyl liquidators, a group of volunteers, men who went in to clean up the radioactive material, to shovel that stuff off the roof back into the hole, saving how many thousands or millions of lives, we'll probably never know exactly. And they went in after the robots they sent in had failed. The radiation was that bad that it was killing the robots. And so they sent these guys in 5 minutes at a time. They gave them radiation shielding, but they knew, yeah, you're going to come out of this with every kind of cancer you can imagine if you survive at all. And they stepped into the gap, got the reactor stabilized, and died, got sick. This is a concept that is deeply meaningful, and it's not just modern examples. You can go back as far as you want in any history and you find the same. The 300 at Thermopylae, or as we started with, Horatius at the gate. Now, I've been rambling about this for almost 10 minutes, giving examples from real life, from mythology, of this concept. That throughout history, civilization has been preserved by the sacrifice of these young men or old, flinging themselves into situations where there's no glamour, there's no glory, there's just, if somebody doesn't do it, civilization is going to collapse. And these young men step up, and they do it. Tapping into this is how Matsumoto elevates a very boring connective tissue chapter. We're basically just checking in on 3 people who we know what they're doing. And by focusing in on what we call the sequel, when you're writing, you have something called scene and sequel. The scene is what happens. The sequel is the reaction to what's happening. So instead of focusing in on the battle itself, Matsumoto focuses in on Jin Narumi's reasons for doing this, his reason for being here. Jin Narumi does not expect to come out of this fight with a victory. Jin Narumi expects to be either killed or utterly defeated by this kaiju. Jin Narumi expects that he's probably going to render himself useless as a combatant going forward as the best outcome. He's going to burn his brain up. And he's okay with that as long as he manages to pass the baton on to Kafka. As long as he manages to hold out long enough for Kafka to wake up and defeat this thing. And Jin Narumi, this young man, again, not that many years past the age of being legally able to drink, is willing to step up and do this because he saw his mentor, the old man, step up and do the same thing. And again, this is the connective tissue that has held human civilization together for as long as anybody can remember. Definitely for as long as stories have been told. That's why in this connective tissue chapter, we can have Jin Narumi frying his brain. We can have Vice Captain Hoshina taking a blow that he's pretty sure is going to kill him, and if not kill him, at least destroy his bones and take him out of any fight for a long, long time. You saw that crack, a sound effect when that final blow hit him, both of which are resounding defeats, and yet it doesn't feel like a defeat, because ultimately winning that fight was never their goal. They were simply stepping into the breach, facing the armies at the gate, making sure that the meltdown didn't happen, so that someone else could step up and fix the problem after they'd filled that stopgap. One more time, I'd like to take you back 200 years and just repeat that quartet of lines from a poem written before a good number of the nations currently on this planet existed. Then out spoke brave Horatius, the captain of the gate. To every man upon this earth, death cometh soon or late. And how can man die better than facing fearful odds for the ashes of his fathers and the temples of his gods? Step into a world of science and of story, of laughter and of tears. Betty Adams has crafted entire worlds of science fiction and science fantasy adventure in her Humans Are Weird series and in her Dying Embers series. Be prepared to laugh, cry, and become absorbed. Check out her books at the links below the video.